The scorching sun of 1972 baked the asphalt of the legendary production empire. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy with the scent of expensive tobacco and looming deals. Moving through the central corridors was the towering icon of the silver screen, a man whose squint and silhouette defined the cinematic landscape of the era. He wasn't there to step before the lens, but to dominate a boardroom filled with power players, legal minds, and financiers who spoke in figures that would make most men tremble. Glued to his flank was a human fortress, a sentinel of 6'5" and 350 pounds of dense muscle. This guardian, a former elite operative from the legendary training grounds of the eastern seaboard, had survived the brutal, humid nightmare of the jungle conflict. He had returned from those distant battlefields, forged into something harder, colder, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Having served the iconic star for 8 months, the Sentinel operated under a singular, unshakable dogma. Physical mass determines the victor. To him, training was a matter of survival, and combat was an ugly, visceral reality where only the strong stood at the end. He had no time for theatrics or sportive displays. He had seen the genuine article of violence where a split second of doubt meant a permanent sleep. He had never tasted defeat, never encountered a man capable of toppling his massive frame, and certainly never imagined a world where his understanding of violence would be dismantled. That changed on the day he crossed paths with the martial pioneer. The visionary was also on the lot for his own high-level negotiations, moving through a separate sector of the sprawling studio. But the industry is a small village. Their trajectories were destined to collide. The legendary star knew the pioneer, possessing a deep-seated appreciation for the way the smaller man was shattering traditional barriers and forcing the industry to reconsider its archaic views on representation. The Sentinel, however, had only heard the rumors. He had heard of the blinding velocity, the legendary strike that could launch a full-grown man across a room, and the kicks that pulverized timber with surgical precision. To the veteran, it was all smoke and mirrors. He saw it as nothing more than the trickery of the lens, the clever placement of wires, and the choreography of experts designed to make performers look lethal. He knew the difference between the staged ballet of a film set and the chaotic, bone-crushing reality of a dark alley. Or so he believed. As the negotiations concluded early, the star emerged from the executive wing, his security detail trailing like a dark shadow. They navigated the backlot, a labyrinth of massive stages, equipment caravans, and bustling crews. Near the 7th soundstage, they spotted the martial visionary engaged in a quiet conversation with the director of photography. He wore simple, dark training attire, standing alone without the need for a protective entourage. The star raised a hand in greeting, and the visionary responded with a warm smile of recognition, stepping away from his conversation to meet the legend. They exchanged a firm handshake, a moment of mutual respect between two masters of their respective crafts. The star inquired about current projects, and the pioneer mentioned a developing venture with a rival studio. During the exchange, the visionary's gaze drifted toward the Sentinel, reading his posture and energy with the precision of a hawk scanning the terrain. The star introduced his lead security, but the Sentinel remained frozen, refusing the gesture of a handshake, his eyes narrowing as he measured the smaller man. In the Sentinel's mind, the pioneer was a featherweight, barely touching 135 pounds. He had neutralized much larger threats in the desperate corners of the eastern capital. He spoke with a voice devoid of warmth, challenging the validity of the stories surrounding the pioneer's speed. The tension spiked instantly. The Sentinel took a deliberate step forward, crowding the space to exert his massive physical presence. The star's assistant recognized the shift in energy, sensing the impending eruption of a hard lesson. The star offered a quiet warning, but the Sentinel was already committed to exposing what he perceived as a myth. He was tired of the veneration of a movie star when he had seen the faces of true warriors. The pioneer remained tranquil, his head tilting with a look of genuine curiosity rather than aggression. He acknowledged the Sentinel's combat background with sincerity, noting that true conflict is far removed from the safety of a demonstration. The atmosphere around them grew unnaturally still, the hum of the studio fading into a sharp silence as observers sensed the shifting frequency of the confrontation. The star attempted to intervene, commanding his guard to stand down, but the sentinel's ego had reached a boiling point after months of hearing the pioneer's praises. He challenged the smaller man to a real test, right then and there, without cameras or coordinators. The pioneer agreed, but suggested they move to the seclusion of the 12th soundstage to avoid a spectacle. They marched toward the massive, hollow structure, the door creaking as it swallowed the group into the darkness. The interior was a cavern of cold concrete and dormant equipment. The pioneer stood in the center, a figure of absolute stillness. The sentinel shed his jacket, rolling his massive shoulders as he prepared to crush the man who dared to stand before him with such calm. He was certain of his victory. The pioneer stood relaxed, his hands at his sides, offering no defensive stance. When the sentinel lunged with the speed of his elite training, the pioneer's head moved a mere 3 inches, letting the massive fist whistle through empty air. A follow-up strike, backed by 300 pounds of momentum, met only the void as the pioneer shifted with minimal surgical efficiency. Before the sentinel could recalibrate, he felt a ghostly pressure on his wrist, not a grip, but a redirection. His balance vanished. His own mass became his enemy as he was guided toward the floor. The impact of 350 pounds hitting the concrete echoed through the rafters. Shaken but fueled by rising fury, the sentinel tried to surge back to his feet, only to find a foot resting lightly on his chest. It was a suggestion of power that felt as absolute as the pull of the earth. The pioneer told him to stay down with a voice that was almost compassionate. The sentinel refused, grabbing the pioneer's ankle with a hand that could crush stone, intending to drag the smaller man into a wrestling match where size would prevail. Instead of resisting, the pioneer descended, using the sentinel's own grip as a pivot point. In one fluid, hypnotic motion, the pioneer's free heel connected with the sentinel's jaw. It wasn't a killing blow, but a neurological reset that turned the world white. The sentinel's grip failed, and he slumped back onto the concrete, his body no longer responding to his commands. The silence in the stage was deafening. The legendary star stood in genuine shock, having witnessed the impossible. The encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds. The pioneer requested water for the fallen man, explaining that the sentinel would suffer from vertigo upon waking. He apologized to the star, noting that he had tried to avoid the clash. When asked how such a feat was possible, the pioneer explained that a grab is a rigid commitment, and once a man commits to a single path, he loses the ability to adapt. He had simply provided an outcome the veteran could not envision. This wasn't a brawl. It was a profound education. The sentinel eventually sat up, his mind struggling to process the sequence that had just dismantled his entire worldview. The pioneer helped him to his feet with effortless grace, noting that while the sentinel was undeniably strong, his reliance on that strength made him predictable and therefore vulnerable. The sentinel wanted to demand a second chance, but deep in his soul, he knew the result was inevitable. He asked how it was done, and the pioneer explained that he does not meet force with force, but rather uses the opponent's own momentum and assumptions against them. The pioneer excused himself for his meeting, leaving a final piece of advice. Next time, seek to learn through dialogue rather than conflict. The door closed, and the star stood in the darkness, realizing he had just seen the difference between playing a tough guy and being a force of nature. The sentinel eventually resigned, unable to reconcile his past identity with the reality he had experienced. The story of those 8 seconds became a hushed legend within the industry, a secret shared only by those who understood that true power isn't measured in pounds, but in the mastery of the self and the understanding of the flow of energy. Decades later, the star would recount the event to his inner circle, always emphasizing that while his guard was the toughest man he had ever known, the pioneer was something beyond human classification. He was the genuine article, a man who didn't need to pretend because he simply was. The lesson remained etched in the memories of those few witnesses, a reminder that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one who has no need to prove it. For the sentinel, the encounter was the end of one life and the beginning of a long journey toward a deeper understanding of the world, sparked by a man who weighed half as much, but possessed a spirit that was immeasurable.